is fear so prevalent in our society? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is filmmaker Bill Bennett. We're going to talk about his new documentary, Facing Fear. It all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, fear not, and thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, the guest portion of the show. We've got a fantastic return guest. His name is Bill Bennett. He's an award-winning filmmaker and author. His home country of Australia, and that's where he's visiting us from today. He's won the equivalent of the Oscar in the Australian Film Institute Awards for Best Film, Best Director. He's been nominated 12 times. His documentary work has been awarded with 2 Logies, Australian television's highest award. He's had 2 feature films in an official selection at the Cannes Film Festival. He's won Best Picture at Karlovy Vary, Palm Springs, and Hawaiian Film Festivals. He's done an amazing job in terms of he's got scripted films, fiction. He's got scripted documentaries. He's got books, a series of books through Penguin. And young adult novels, Palace of Fires is 3 of those. His producing partner, he works with often, Jennifer Clough. They've got several films and TV series in developments. And just Bill is an amazing guy. He recently did a film called GPS about intuition, and he did a wonderful job with that. And his latest project that we're going to talk about mostly today is about fear. And so I'm thrilled because it's a topic that's on everyone's mind all the time, because it's really something that's been perpetrated and put upon us by the media just constantly. And it's all about fear these days. So my special guest returning to Guys Radio is Bill Bennett. Welcome back to the show.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
So you're a storied filmmaker and novelist. How did all of your creative path begin? What was the start of that? What inspired you? Did it come from when you were a boy, when you studied in school? Where was the tipping points for you? The inciting incidents?
Oh, crikey, Robert. I tell you what, I was at my mother's place. She's 95. She's still alive, and I was trawling through her photo albums. You do that at this point in her life. When you're wanting to kind of get sort of a retrospective of things. And I was looking through some old photo albums, and there was a photograph of me, I must have been about 5 or 6 years old, with a box Brownie camera. And I thought, my goodness, even at that age, I had an interest in photography. And I did. I grew up loving cameras, loving the technical aspect of photography. At quite a young age, I built a darkroom in an underground room at our house when we were living in Brisbane in Queensland. I was doing my own processing. Through school even, I was photographing and writing stories, basically working as a freelance photojournalist, submitting to magazines, getting them published, that sort of thing. So that went through into my university years. I paid my way partly through university by doing freelance journalism. So it just I just loved photography. I loved images, and I loved writing. And so filmmaking kind of came as a consequence of that. It almost came as a revelation that I could combine my love of writing, my love of photography into something like that. But Robert, I got to say, my next birthday is 70. So I grew up in Brisbane in a very conservative environment in the 70s, really. And the prospect of being a filmmaker or a film director was kind of equivalent to the prospect of being an astronaut. There was there was no film schools, there was no career path, there was nothing. I just had this desire to tell stories through photography and writing, and it was as simple as that.
And your very first written piece of work and your very first film. Tell us about those, what you learned, what the process was like. How did you deal with questions about the work? What did you learn from your own experience in terms of how to do the work?
Well, I I started off studying medicine, in fact, at university. I did 2 years of medicine and bailed out of that because I just knew intuitively that I was not cut out to be a doctor. At the time, I was, as I say, I was working as a photojournalist freelance, and that was my real love. And so I switched my course across to journalism. I quickly got picked up by the ABC, Australia's equivalent of the BBC, if you like, and was trained by them. It turned out to be the best training possible for a journalist. Over a period of 10 years, I started off as a news reporter, moved into current affairs, then moved into documentaries. And while I was a documentary maker, I picked up this extraordinary story from the front page of a newspaper in Australia here about a street in which Vietnam veterans were dying. And the story centered on one Vietnam veteran in particular who believed that there was a causal relationship between Agent Orange and the cancer that he had developed. And he took the government to court. And he ended up dying through this cancer, but his wife took the fight on his behalf. She continued, ended up winning, and it became the first time in the world that a Vietnam vet had proven to a court that Agent Orange caused death through cancer. Anyway, I thought, wow, this is a great story. So I sent a researcher out to do research. She came back and she said, Bill, you got to make this film. You just simply got to make this film. So I then spent several months with this widow out in this street where this all happened. And I came up with this script and no one wanted to finance it, of course. I couldn't get any government backing. I couldn't get, anything. So what I did, I was just determined to make this film. So what I did is I heard that sugarcane prices were high in Queensland and that the sugarcane farmers had excess cash, if you like. And so I just went up and down the coast, knocking on doors until I raised enough money from sugarcane farmers to make the film.
That is amazing. And what kind of deals did you make with them? And if you don't mind my asking, where they would get something back when the film came out, or how did you get that? How did you work
Yeah,
that?
there were at the time there were certain tax breaks available, but I had no track record. This was my first feature film. It's a pretty kind of downer of a subject. It's not like a romantic comedy or a thriller or something like that. Like it's a serious social issue film. I printed up some brochures. The only thing that I had to trade off is that I'd done a documentary, a dramatized documentary a year earlier, and it had won the Sydney Film Festival award for best documentary. That was the only thing that I had to trade off. But, when you're talking to a sugarcane farmer, halfway up the coast of Queensland, he doesn't care about that.
Right.
He doesn't care about that. I mean, look, in the end, I discovered one really important thing, and that is that people invest not so much in the project, but they invest in you. They invest in your passion, your belief, their belief in you doing something important. And the people who invested in the film, I don't think were so much looking for an ROI. They were really looking at backing me, and I think that they were taken by my very real desire to make something special out of this film.
Fantastic. Bill Bennett, my special guest here on Guys Radio. We're going to talk about his new film, Fear, but let's first stop. We're going to fast forward a little bit from your first documentary to the PGS, Personal Guidance System. I said GPS before, but I think it's a play on words. All about intuition. Terrific film. And you talked to us about it on the show, I believe, a few years ago when it came out. What inspired you to make this film, and what did you learn when you made it? It's things that you learned that you didn't know after once you made the film. What did you know that you didn't know when you began it about intuition?
Oh, crikey, Robert. I mean, that's a big one. That is. Look, that film changed my life. So see, what happened was this. My career as a filmmaker started then to take off, and I ended up doing a lot of big movies. I did a romantic comedy with Sandra Bullock in Hollywood for Warner Brothers. I was doing really big stuff, and on this occasion, I was in New Orleans doing a thriller with Burt Reynolds. Um, I had to go to the airport early one morning before dawn to catch the first flight back to Los Angeles. And I was approaching an intersection. I was running late. There was a green light up ahead. I went to accelerate to make sure that I got through on the green. And as I did, a voice kicked in saying, slow down. I ignored it. I thought, this is weird. I must be imagining this. I went to accelerate again. The voice came in more emphatically a second time, slow down. I slowed down, and this huge truck, semi-trailer, ran a red light, just hurtled across the intersection in front of me. Had I not listened to that voice, had I not acted on it, that truck would have killed me. I pulled up on the other side of the intersection. My heart was racing. I was thinking, what the bloody hell just happened? That I was so close to death. And basically, that kind of prompted me then to spend the next 10 years, I'm not joking, it was 10 years, researching intuition and trying to understand what happened to me. I had three burning questions. What was that voice? Where did it come from? And why did it save my life? And those three questions really propelled me through the film. And to answer your question as to what I learned in the making of that film, and in saying it changed my life, it did change my life. When I started off, I didn't know a damn thing about intuition. I mean, I knew it as a word, and we all think we know what intuition is, but I had no understanding of how it worked or anything like that. And I met some extraordinary people through the making of that film. I traveled the world 3 times, and I spoke to I spoke to the Prince of Bhutan, amongst other things. I met the Hindu equivalent of the Dalai Lama and spoke to him. I spoke to some extraordinary neuroscientists and psychiatrists and so forth. And I learned a huge amount about intuition, and I learned a huge amount about myself. And what happened was that I shifted. I changed as a person through the making of that film. I changed fundamentally. I started to see that there's a bigger picture, and that we exist in a bigger picture to the one that I had previously imagined. I had grown up in a family where both my parents were dentists. My household was very evidence-based in thinking. My period as a journalist only emphasized that and sort of honed my skills in being cynical to anything, that couldn't be proven. But during the making of this film, I decided that I would let go of that. I didn't want to make a BBC documentary kind of thing. I wanted to keep an open mind. I wanted to, I thought there's something going on here that I don't understand. Science really couldn't explain to me what that voice was, so I had to look elsewhere. And in looking elsewhere, I discovered that, to use Shakespeare's words, there are more things in heaven and earth than I dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's amazing. I had my own situation similar to that. I had which I didn't know about, but I had this massive appendicitis attack 2.5 years ago, and I was laying on the floor in my bedroom, and my life force started to leave my body, and I got a message in my head, and it said, "Don't drink alcohol." I pulled myself back in my body. I went to the hospital. They did an appendectomy on me. I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I never drank alcohol after that. I didn't have an alcohol issue, but I heard that voice, and I followed it because I figured it was there to tell me something. I have no idea where it came from, and I just figured, you know what? If it made itself so available to me, there's got to be more than meets the eye here. So, and I know there is, so I might as well listen. And I did. So similar situation. And did it save my life the way your life was saved? I don't know, but I don't think it hurt, because I think I'm a lot more clear now. I don't really need alcohol and as a social lubricant or anything like that. So, and it's a very different experience when you're socializing and all, and you don't drink. And I worked in the distilled spirits business and the wine business for many years. So it was a big change for me, but I listened. So do you listen now to your intuition, Bill?
I do absolutely. And it's really interesting, Robert, because now when I look back on my life and I see major turning points in my life, um, I realize that intuition had a role to play. There are times when I acted on the intuitive nudge that I got and things worked out. And there were times when I ignored that intuitive voice or prompt and things didn't turn out. In fact, things got really kind of ugly. And I can see that now with some clarity. What was interesting in making this film is that we screened it theatrically in cinemas around Australia and around America. And for many of those screenings, I attended and did Q&As. And then after the Q&As, people would come up to me and they would say, you know what, Bill, this validates what happened to me. And then they would tell me their particular story about how a voice or an intuitive prompt saved their life. Interestingly, the majority of the stories were always car-based or road-based or, I mean, I remember one person telling me a story about how they were about to step off on a street, a road, with crosslights, pedestrian crossing, and the light turned red, the walk signal came on, they're about to step off, and a hand came out of nowhere and pulled this person back, so that stopping this person from stepping off into the road. Car, boom, went right through. Had that person just stepped off as they were going to, they would have been killed by that car. Looked around, no one behind them. What was that hand? These sort of stories. And these people don't come up to me and spin me a line. I mean, you look into their eyes and they're telling you what happened. And this happened time and time again. And what I realized was that what happened to me in the car with that voice wasn't unusual. It wasn't freakish. It wasn't, it wasn't exceptional. This sort of thing happens all the time. It's just that most people don't talk about it because they're embarrassed to. They're embarrassed that people will think they're crazy or, going nuts or whatever. So whilst these people said it validated their story, they're coming up to me and telling me this stuff validated my story as well.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. So since then, do you go out of your way now to listen more? Are you more present that way in terms of being able to receive this type of message, or do you just continue to go on your path, and if things come up, you're more aware that that might be my intuition giving me some information again?
Yeah, it's more the latter than the former. It's not that I necessarily have my radar spinning at a higher rate, but I do make decisions now. There's no doubt that I make decisions now intuitively rather than rationally. So if something doesn't feel right, and I understand that just that thing of this feels right, this doesn't feel right. This person feels like somebody that I could work with. This person doesn't feel like somebody I could work with, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I trust that now. I trust it absolutely. And I know that it is part of what I call my personal guidance system, PGS, working to guide me in the right direction. What I learned, Robert, was this, and that is that intuition has two functions. Its primary function is to keep us alive. That's its number one function, because we can't fulfill our purpose in this lifetime if we're dead. So number one, intuition tries to keep us alive, and hence that voice. You're working in. I found it interesting that you're working in the wine and spirit industry. That your intuition said no more alcohol. Mm-hmm. You don't know what was down the track for you, but exactly. You trusted that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the number one function of intuition is to keep us alive. The second function is to keep us on our path and our path through life. And but most people don't. Most people ignore that, and this is why we end up with so much unhappiness and depression and people getting sick and stuff like that. It's because they haven't followed their intuitive path. That they end up in jobs that they hate. They end up in relationships that just aren't working. they go into business ventures that end up collapsing. And it's because they haven't followed those intuitive nudges that were there saying, no, do not undertake that business. Do not go into a relationship with this person. Do not make that investment decision. Most people follow common sense. They follow logic. They follow advice from other people. They don't follow their heart. They don't follow their intuition. And consequently, like I say, there's so much illness. There's so much unhappiness. People feel unfulfilled. They get to a certain point in their life, and and it's one of the reasons why the suicide rate is so high, I think.
Mm-hmm. Let's take that. Let's walk across that bridge now and take it all the way to the next movie, the new movie, Fear, because I believe there's a relationship. And just one little bit of punctuation on the personal guidance system. I think that sometimes people don't trust their intuition because they're not sure if it's intuition or not. There's a lot of mental chatter, and we are overloaded with information and data. And I think people don't trust the information that's coming in because they think, what am I, just talking to myself? It's something like when you start to meditate, it takes a while for you to quiet your mind down and allow spirit or whatever to come in and have that type of connection there. But let's cross the bridge to it.
Just on that, Robert, what I've discovered is this: intuition comes in clear and without an agenda. There's nothing attached to intuition. It doesn't seek an outcome. Your logical, if you like, small self wants you to do something. It has an agenda, and often it's a fear-based response. So the way that I have learned to distinguish between what is a small self voice, if you like, and what is my higher self voice is the higher self voice doesn't want anything. It's just pure, clean guidance. Mm-hmm. The small self voice wants something, and often, as I say, it's fear-based.
Mm-hmm. That's beautifully stated, and that's a perfect segue. I'm with Bill Bennett. We're talking about his new film, the award-winning documentary filmmaker Bill Bennett. We're talking about Fear, the new film. Tell us about what was the inspiration for this topic. Where are you in the process of launching the film? And I watched it recently. It was terrific. I really can connect with a lot of the guests. We've had some of your guests in your film on our show, Paul Selig for one, and I thought it was terrific. So tell us just the platforms for you, Bill. Tell us about Fear and the movie.
Oh, thank you. The film is called Facing Fear. And Robert, what happened was that when I was making the film on intuition, I discovered that as I've said here, the biggest blockage to intuition is fear. And I started to think about that, and I thought, well, in the same way that I thought I knew what intuition was, and then got into it and realized that I didn't know what intuition was, I thought I knew what fear was. But the more I started to read up on fear, the more I realized that it's actually quite a complex kind of thing. And I thought that it would be interesting to put my forensic lens onto it in the same way that I had with intuition. But so partway through making the film on intuition, I decided that I would make a film on fear. But then what happened was that at the end of the making the intuition film, I started to get symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And it was kind of like the universe was saying to me, Bill, if you want to make a film on fear, let's do it for real. Let's put you in a real fear, mate, and let you make this film, from a personal perspective that's absolutely authentic. So I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease after having made the decision to make the film on fear. And with that diagnosis, of course, I was thrown into, very real fear. And so I've used that in the film. I've got to say that I've used that in the film as an entry point, if you like, for a much broader discussion on fear, as you saw, when you saw the film. My wife of 40 years, who is much wiser and stronger than me, um, was dead against me using this Parkinson's in the film, dead against it. Her attitude was, what you focus on, you will manifest. And if you state in this film, I have Parkinson's disease, and you get up in Q&As and you talk about that, it is only going to you are going to step into your reality that you have created. To which I said, darling, I've got Parkinson's disease. I don't think these things happen randomly. This has happened for some purpose. I've been a fit, healthy person all my life. I've looked after myself. I've eaten well. I've exercised all my life. Why would this happen to me? It must have happened for some purpose. And the only purpose that I can think of is twofold. One is that it's an important step in my spiritual growth. And the second is that I have to somehow put it into service. I have to somehow use this. I don't mean to sound in any way sort of self-righteous or grandiose, but I've got to somehow use this to help other people. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise I see no sense in it. It makes no sense. And I don't believe that these things happen randomly.
Is your wife on board now that you've made that decision? She's seen your
No. I mean, I've been doing Q&As, and somebody asked me this question. I say, I bring my wife. My wife's in the audience, and I say, "Come on, darling, come. You're best to speak about this. You speak." And she gets up and she absolutely tears the skin off me.
Wow.
She absolutely roasts me. She still believes that I shouldn't have done it, and it's a stupid thing. She acknowledges and respects my decisions, for my reasons for doing it, but she still doesn't agree with it. No.
How did you choose your guest stars, if you will, for both the movie about intuition and fear? How did you kind of identify who you wanted to speak with, and then make the connections to get them in your film?
It's a really good question, Robert. Look, I'm a producer. I've been a journalist. I've operated very logically and methodically and so forth all my life. What I discovered with both these films is that that I had to let go of everything. All the people that are in the film are choices from my intuition. I cannot say any other way. Like, I've got Carolyn Mace, for instance, you never see in interviews. She doesn't do interviews, right, but she's in both these films. And she came about because I was directed towards this bloke called Norm Shealy, Dr. Norm Shealy. Mm-hmm. And I did an interview with him. And then at the end of the interview, he called up Carolyn. It turned out they're really good mates, and they've worked together for many, many years. He called up Carolyn. He said, "Carolyn, you've got to meet this bloke. You got to do an interview with him. Don't argue with me. Do it." And so I get an interview with Carolyn Mays, and it kind of happened like that with Paul Selig. Paul is in both films again,
right?
And I'd finished filming all of the interviews for PGS. And I was quite interested in the process of channeling, and I'd gone onto Amazon to look for books on channeling. And I came across Paul Selig, in fact, his fourth book, The Book of Mastery, and it just spoke to me. So I got it on Kindle. I read it straight away. Then I went back and I read the three previous books, I Am the Word, and read them all. And I said to Jennifer, my wife, we've got to go to New York. We've got to interview this bloke. And she said, we finished filming. We don't have the money. You can't do it. I said, darling, we've got to do it. So we found the money. We went to New York. In fact, we interviewed Paul the day that Donald Trump got elected as president.
Wow.
New York was sort of in
Shock.
in a state of shock and grief, and they were literally walking down Central Park East or whatever it is. People were crying in the street. Um, but it was, but Paul has become a dear friend. I have learned so much from him. He probably more than anybody has influenced my worldview and been instrumental in my growth. But it was absolutely an intuitive choice, Robin, totally intuitive choice. People talk about going into a bookstore and a book falling out of the shelf at their feet and picking it up, and that's the book that changes their life. Well, that's what happened to me when I went on Amazon.
Oh, that's what.
Thank you, Jeff.
I met Paul Selig by way of, I went to a bookstore, kind of a new age store on 14th Street and Fifth Avenue in New York. Fifth Avenue, I think, 5th or 6th. And I saw this book on the shelf. My wife was looking around at precious stones. I was looking around at the books, and a book said, "I Am the Word." And I picked it up and I took it home. And Paul Selig, nobody knew who he was at the time. It was his first book. It just came out. It was his local bookstore. He lived right around the corner. I didn't know that. I read the book. I didn't get it, but I read it again, which I never do. And then I read it a third time, which I never, ever do. And I'm like, I think I get what this is, and I'm connecting with it. Since then, I've attended Paul's workshops. I've had him on my show with every book launch, and I've learned so much through the guides, because as Paul says, he is strictly a radio frequency and antenna, and it's the guides that are doing the teaching. So once again, intuition raises its head and helps us. How long does it take to make a documentary film like this? Just for our listeners, they want, they go to a film and they watch it, they enjoy it. How long does it take to make something like this? What is the process like?
I don't make these films quickly, Robert. PGS took 5 years. Facing Fear took 4 years. I mean, in editing, I spent 18 months in editing on PGS. With this film, it was faster. I took 9 months.
Okay.
Largely because with PGS, there were 2 problems with PGS. One is that I didn't know anything about intuition, and I was learning about it as I went. And that was a long process. And it wasn't a straight line graph, I would learn something, and then I would sink back into rational thinking, and then I would intuitively find somebody or read a book that would then take me up the next step, and then I'd fall back again, and so forth. The editing is painstaking. It's a lengthy and complex process. You look at the films; they flow through so easily, so quickly. They're quite effortless. But believe me, the work and toil that goes into it to make it that way is huge. And I'm an experienced filmmaker. I know what I'm doing.
Now, you've done a lot of scripted. You've done some rom-coms. You've worked with some of the top actors: Sandra Bullock, Dennis Leary, Burt Reynolds, Colleen Montague. What's the difference from your perspective as a filmmaker in terms of working on scripted, kind of Hollywood formulaic in some ways stories versus making a documentary?
I don't want to do that stuff anymore, Robert. I just simply don't. At this point in my life, if I had the choice to get a high-paying gig doing, a Hollywood thriller or a romantic comedy, I would say no. And I mean that absolutely. Because most films don't have any underlying meaning. Now, that's not the case of all films, but most films don't. And at this point in my life, I want to concentrate on these films. I want to do stuff that has meaning and that I can learn from. Because if I learn stuff, then other people are going to learn stuff. I'm not sort of trying to proselytize or to change the world or anything like that. I'm trying to change myself. And if I change myself, then in some way that might help change the world.
What other topics do you see kind of over the horizon for you to tackle after you've just, Fear, the book, the Facing Fear is coming out, then you've got the PGS, What would be next after fear?
Hope.
That's
Hope.
what I was kind of thinking, that
What
faith or trust or hope, something like that, right?
Yeah. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to do 5 films in this series, um, because Facing Fear follows exactly the same style template as PGS, as you've seen. You know, it's in chapters, and you've got the what I call the interstitial visual sequences with the drone shots and so forth. The next film will be on hope. Beyond the one after that is going to be on purpose. The one after that is going to be on death, which I'm calling the veil. So intuition, fear, hope, purpose, and death, and they're all interwoven. You know, they're all exploring. They're all exploring the soul journey, if you like. You know, the journey of the soul.
Now, when you're
And
working
that's what
on
really interesting.
when you're working on them,
Sorry.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you going to, with these next 3 films, you're going to work on them concurrently, or are you going to do Hope and then the next 2, or do you shoot it all and then parse it into 3 separate stories? How do you approach that from a creator's point of view?
It's a really, really good question. I'm really struggling with that at the moment, Robert. I mean, ideally, what I'd like would be a big chunk of money so that I could go and shoot the 3, because there'll be people that will be common to the 3 films. Like, for instance, Paul has agreed to be involved in the next 3 films. Lee Carroll has agreed to. But there'll be other people that will be specific to each individual film. For instance, I really want to try and speak to Brené Brown about hope, for instance. I'd like to speak to Sir Richard Branson about purpose. You know, so there are people that I'll be targeting. I'm hoping that I'll be able to speak to Michelle Obama about hope. Ideally, I'd like to have a chunk of money, being $2 million US to do the 3 films, and be able to do that. But when it comes to the editing, I'm just simply going to have to focus on 1 film at a time, because it does require that level of focus and intensity. But, you know, if somebody came to me tomorrow and gave me a check for $2 million, then what I'd do is I would go off and shoot the 3 films. And then I would look at putting the films out 3 years in a row. So, you know, the film on Hope would be 1 year, then the film on Purpose would be the next year, and then the film on Death would be the year after.
Wearing the different hats you've worn and you continue to wear, Bill, writer, producer, director, talent, novelist, what brings you the most joy?
Oh, that's another good question. I love doing these films. I got to say, look. I love being behind the camera, and I love. And you saw both films have extraordinary cinematography. You know, they're stunning looking films, and I enjoy that aspect of it. But look, in the end, I'm a writer, and there's nothing gives me more pleasure than just sitting in a room by myself with a laptop writing. I'd like to get these 3 films done, and then I'd just like to just concentrate on my writing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
After this experience that you've gone through over the last year or so, what do you now fear?
You ask good questions, Robert.
That's what we do here, Bill.
To be quite frank, I don't fear anything. I really don't. I mean, look, if somebody burst into the room here with a knife, you know, and went to stab me, I would have a survival fear.
Sure.
There's no doubt about that. That's bolted into my DNA. It's bolted into everyone's DNA. But in terms of the fears and anxieties and stresses that used to plague me, I don't have them anymore. And I've come to realize one really crucial thing, and that is that all fear in some form is based on loss. Now, I haven't found a fear yet that is not based on loss. And in when this first occurred to me, and I've not read this anywhere, and no one's told me this, or this just kind of come from my trying to understand exactly what fear is and where it comes from. Fear of death is loss, of course. Fear of lack of money is loss. I mean, you can go through them, peel it back. It's all based on loss. And what I came to realize is if I could come to terms with my fear of loss, then I could pretty much rid myself of fear. And so that's what I've done. I've just gone, right, there's no such thing as loss in the universe. There is no such thing of loss in the universe. And if you really truly believe that, then the fear just dissipates. It just goes away.
Very, very well stated. Bill Bennett, my special guest on Guys Radio. The new film is Facing Fear. Also check out the PGS, Personal Guidance System. He's done a trilogy of young adult books. He's done scripted rom-coms, all kinds of Hollywood films. And he's just an amazing talent. And I can say it's an honor to have you on the show again, Bill. And best of luck with Facing Fear. Tell everybody where they can find your work, including the new movie.
Thanks, Robert, for saying that. My website is Bill Bennett, BILLBENNETT. Oh, sorry, you Americans don't say double N's, do you? You say NNETT. I learned that. .com.au, AU is for Australia. Facing Fear is going out theatrically in cinemas. We're doing pop-up screenings around America starting January the 18th. We premiere at the San Rafael Film Center in the Bay Area of California on January the 18th. We then do pop-up screenings all around the country after that. Eventually it'll be online. And in terms of PGS, that's available on Amazon, iTunes, Google Play. Palace of Fires, as you say, has been published by Penguin Random House. It's available on Amazon, I believe. And I've done another book called The Way, My Way. It's my book of walking the Camino. And it's been very popular. That's on Amazon as well.
Fantastic. Well, keep up the good work. God bless you. And thanks for being our guest once again on Guys Radio. Bill Bennett, everybody. If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our YouTube and podcast. Thanks for your support.